This is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and um, definitely good timing to do this again. I'm currently in my own spiral of burnout again. So I am saying this to myself as much as I am saying it to you. Um, I do have some acknowledgments that are important before we get started. So, namely Dr. Sasha Shilcutt. She's an anesthesiologist in Nebraska, and also the CEO and founder of Brave Enough. And so this is a leadership conference that I attended in 2021, really focused on women in leadership and burnout specifically. And so I've been able to do some private coaching, one-on-one, attend these conferences and work with her in a variety of ways since 2021. And in its own right has really been like life-saving to some degree. So I want to make sure and kind of give her a shout out for that. Um, Also, having women ally and leadership is super important. So I wanted to give a shout out to our department chair, Dr. Krause, who's here today. Some of the things that we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation is like ways that you can bring this to your own small piece of the world, and having someone that's really able to support what we're doing at the Behavioral Health and Wellness Clinic in particular has been instrumental in being able to do that. Um, also have my own burnout accountability partners, and they have to stay pretty busy keeping me honest. So one is here today. So John, thank you. I got a text right before this of the basketball court. He's like, where are you? And so I actually have never been able to attend this on Wednesdays because one of my own burnout prevention strategies is playing basketball on Wednesdays and Fridays. And so he helps keep me honest with that. Dr. Daniel, and then I also wanted to give a shout out to two of our interns at the clinic, one of which, Molly, that's here, who helped update the lit review for the presentation today as well. So before we get started, I do want to acknowledge privilege to cover all the things that we need to cover in this talk. Like there's just no way I can speak to all the different levels of like identities and intersectionality that really comes up with this topic. Burnout at times can feel like a form of oppression in a way that systems are keeping us down, right? And that the more that we are down and exhausted, the less that we can do in other areas. But burnout also sometimes is a privilege. And, you know, having the privilege of health is a very real thing. And there were certainly times during my cancer journey where I would have like given anything that email would have been my main pain point, or that a toxic work environment would have been like the main thing I was dealing with. There are going to be things that we're going to talk about with like caretaking and caregiving stress. And there are folks here who might give anything to have a child to take care of or a parent still around to provide care to. And so I just think it's really important that we keep that in mind and also acknowledge I will not be able to speak to all those different levels of dimension with every concept that we talk about, but how this presents in each of our lives and at different times in our lives is very important. So when you chew on this information in the future, keep those positions in mind. All right. We have three main objectives to get through today. We want to bring some awareness to how burnout develops, what it is, how it's maintained. I'm going to try to teach you 5 specific strategies for prevention or recovery from burnout. And then I'm hoping that these first 2 objectives will provide some inspiration to you of like, how do you apply this in your own area of the world that maybe can help us like be able to make some change also from like a top down and a bottom up approach. So how is stress and burnout different? The simplest answer is you can have stress without burnout, but you cannot have burnout without stress, okay? And so burnout is really like chronic cumulative stress that has gone unchecked. And with stress, there is a level of participating in activation that is still happening. And so the graphics that I have here are sort of representing that. Like even when you're experiencing very high stress, if you're not yet in like critical burnout, it may feel like you're drowning, but there still is movement on your part. You might be able to see the shoreline from time to time. You are treading water. It is not fun. It's not the goal. It doesn't mean if you can still see the shoreline every now and then, you're good. But there is a sense of action that you're still able to take. Whereas burnout in its most critical form is very inactive. There is a letting go. There's a lot of disconnection, depersonalization, loss of identity, and you cannot see the shore. And it can be really difficult to get out of critical stages of burnout because it is so heavy and it really can be all consuming across many areas of your life. And so burnout is kind of one of those phrases that can be used sort of casually, but when we're talking about it really from like a clinical impairing sense, this is kind of a distinction for you to think about between stress and burnout. There are a bunch of different like symptoms that you can look for, and these can be hard to tease apart. Some of these are symptoms, you know, of like being a graduate student or this time in the semester, things like that. But we're looking for chronic, pervasive, ongoing, impairing kind of levels of these symptoms. But apathy, withdrawal, having difficulty thinking, you know, difficulty with your cognitive functioning, reduced creativity or being able to be imaginative or enjoy things that you used to be able to enjoy, increased numbness, cynicism, irritation. These are all things to think about. There's significant physical and mental health fallout from this, and so you are at an increased risk for different types of cancers, for cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, stroke. These things are seem to be mostly tied to it's this chronic release of cortisol happening in your body all the time. These stress hormones are not helpful. And then we have these mental health, you know, you can have relationship problems, anxiety, depression, suicidality, suicide completion. These are all things that can be associated with burnout. Typically in the research, you're going to see 5 stages that are referenced. I've also given you a graphic of 12 stages. I think the 12 stages are a little bit more helpful when you're checking in with yourself on like a personal level. So I have that there for you for like as a resource, but conceptually we'll talk mostly today about the main 5 stages. You can go through this sequentially, or you can have different points of entry, right? Your own identity, your own trauma, your own oppression, your own place of work might mean that you join this at a different place in the stages. So the honeymoon phase, this is where kind of culturally things naturally get reinforced. You might still be, you know, young and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at your job and feel excited and connected, and you want to do, you know, great at what you're doing. You might have high energy and maybe you're being productive, and then you likely are coming into contact with reinforcers that are reinforcing overwork behaviors. And this can happen on an individual level. It certainly happens on a societal level of that we can kind of glamorize overwork in some kind of, you know, in some ways your productivity and what you're doing. I think for me personally, this also is very challenging of like not really having representation within our field or department. When I was in training, that it really seemed like the metric if you were working hard enough was how exhausted you were. And so if you weren't conveying exhaustion, then you probably weren't a very good employee. Like you were probably actually really lazy. And that messaging is super harmful. And those are the kinds of things that we are going to talk about today, that like we need to catch ourselves in those patterns when we're not, so that we're not, you know, perpetuating that for future generations, and also figure out how to reframe those messages for ourselves. But we'll come back to the stages as we progress, but that's to give you a little bit of a introduction. And then each of those just kind of continue to get reinforced in some kind of some kind of way. You would think if someone progresses through those and they make it to like critical burnout and then you get out, that you would never ever get back in, that this would be like one trial learning. As a repeat habitual offender myself, I will tell you, this is not true. This is not true at all. And so I have a graphic here of Brofenbrenner's ecological systems model. And like, we're going to talk about some of these things today, but there are truly factors at every single one of these levels that just pull us back in. And you have to be so incredibly intentional and diligent, or before you know it, you are just like, it's like your memory's been wiped and you're just right back on this thing and you're just right back on the path and the cycle continues. So we're going to go through these levels in no particular order, but just sort of position ourselves a little bit in like, what are things that could be contributing to burnout for any of us potentially in this room or at this time in the world. So if you are in here today, you have survived a global pandemic. We are seeing the impacts of the opioid epidemic. There is socio-political unrest. We have seen a recent termination of remote work for government employees. And then regionally, we're still, dealing with a variety of different impacts as a result of Hurricane Helene. And all of these things kind of help prime the risk for burnout. Internally, you have a lot going on too. So 35,000 decisions made per day. And what the research really bears out is that women are actually exerting more emotional and cognitive energy making these decisions every day. And part of that is because the decision-making process is different in that women tend to think more about how the decisions impact community and others and do their decision-making collaboratively, and that takes more energy. But 35,000 decisions per day is a lot. We're also getting a bunch of other messages coming at us, right? So think about, how many email accounts do you have? How many social media accounts do you have? Do each of those social media accounts also have a separate messaging account tied to them? What are the push notifications that you're getting throughout any given day? And that's not even counting, what are your in-person messages? Who's stopping by your office? Who's knocking on your door? And so the study here looked at just adolescents during their school day, and only during the hours at school, the average amount of notifications was around 300 notifications for children. And about 25% of those had up to 500 notifications just during their school day. So just imagine how this multiplies when you think about if you're in an administrative position where maybe you have multiple teams of people that you're responsible for, and they're all sending you questions or needing things from you. The amount for some of us, the amount of things, maybe alerts you're getting through Voyager right now or through dynamic forms. And then your different roles in life. If you are responsible to certain committees or communities or your neighborhood, or you're within your household, the amount of prescriptions, dental appointments, vet appointments, medical appointments, and multiply that by every single living thing that you might be responsible for. It's quite a lot. So we can actually experience burnout in multiple different domains simultaneously. We can have all kinds of different levels happening. It's not specific to work. So you can have professional burnout for sure, but there's household related burnout, relationship related, caregiver, education, and there's more, right? Like you also could have autistic burnout, ADHD burnout. I mean, there's so many other dimensions of this that could be factoring low or high for you at any point in time. What kind of, from a systems view and a cultural view that's a little bit frustrating is many of these burnout situations, you take household burnout, for example, they're co-constructed circumstances. So unless you are living in a household of one, and those people have low household burnout, by the way, unless you're living in a household of one, whether it is your roommates, your partner, whatever it is, they're co-contributing to the burnout circumstances. But far and wide we see we're really lacking like co-constructed solutions to how we deal with this. And again, some of this is going to get into what is the messaging that we're getting, and how can we try to make a difference with that. So women in particular provide most of the paid and unpaid acts of caregiving. And research that looks at mental load shows that not only are they responsible for completing more tasks, but they are also responsible for managing, planning, and organizing those tasks. And this is related to household, but we just take these skills to work with us too. And then we like manage our work household that same way, right? Globally, women are also viewed as the kin keepers and the care providers. And so these are folks who were managing and keeping track of the birthdays, the anniversaries, the traditions, the heirlooms. Who is the power of attorney? Who's doing end of life planning? Who is planning the ceremonies? Who is keeping track of what is going to be handed down from generation to generation? Who is making sure the will is getting managed? All of these things, by and large, tend to fall on women. When and if men take a role in this, it's most common as a spouse and not as a son or brother, which is interesting because not everyone will be a spouse, but they may be a son, right? They may be born to someone. And so this is really like this load is not distributed equally. So when you think about how this looks like within a spousal relationship, this study looked at spouses who were caring with a partner with advanced cancer. This whole sample ended up being heterosexual couples. That was not their sampling intention, but that is what ended up happening. But looking at these couples, we've got male cancer patients with wives that are taking care of them, and then we have female cancer patients with husbands who are taking care of them. The female caregivers reported significant levels of stress, depression, and anxiety, whereas the male cancer patients reported significantly higher satisfaction with their relationship and their marriage, with the reverse being true. Interestingly, the emotional work, so like providing the emotional support, doing information seeking, connecting like families, caregivers, updating people of like how's this cancer care journey going? What are their symptoms like today? The logistics with like getting back and forth to appointments, things like that. The female spouses did not even include that labor in their caretaking load. They did not even evaluate that. They evaluated that as their baseline spouse load. Anything that they identified as a caretaker load was above and beyond that they were providing their partner with cancer. Whereas for the men, that was the primary load they were counting. This was the way they were caring for their partner with cancer. So that I think is like an interesting distinction there. Also, female patients reported needing to outsource their care more. So needing to pull in people from the community, their friends and family, which by default lessen the burden on their spouse. Whereas men reported being able to solely rely on their one caregiver to meet all of their needs. Why do we see patterns like this? It's not because men are like ill-intentioned, right? Like there are things happening. There are systems in place. There are attitudes and norms and biases in place that are maintaining these behaviors. One thing that really bears out in the literature is that caregiving can be particularly challenging for male spouse caregivers because of the shift in traditional gender roles, and that shift in gender roles can be really distressing for men, and it can cause decrease in their own psychological well-being. If they're experiencing gender role conflict, it can be linked to anxiety, depression, substance use, relationship issues, further withdrawal. And so this kind of becomes like a negative sort of cycle that can continue to perpetuate itself. And then if we think about this within rural Appalachia, I think it sort of like increases the level of intensity a little bit more, because like most areas, whether this is countries or regions, they identify their own well-being based on like how much money is there, what's your accessibility to like healthcare, to education, things like that. In rural Appalachia, because we've been in poverty for so long and accessibility has been an issue for so long, the research really bears out that's not how we identify our own well-being. We look at spirituality, our community, our relationships, but for men, the number one thing they look at is how well are they serving in their expected social or gender role. And so like what a man in rural Appalachia might really think he's doing well gets super challenged if you're in a situation where now you need to be providing caregiving because you really don't have a schema for like how that can fit within your gender norm. So I want you to keep this in mind for when we get to objective 3, where we really think about like what are points of entry based on your personal life or your professional life, because one area that I think is like ripe for the fight is like diversifying gender roles and gender norms is part of burnout prevention, and it's part of gender equity and household equity and caregiving equity. And that is a mutually beneficial thing, right? That is something that we need men to be able to join us in the fight with this. So the themes continue sort of like no matter where you look. We see burnout the most. It's very, very high in education and in healthcare. But what is impacting it really remains the same. So just going to highlight a few kind of things. But this article on the left was looking at burnout in therapists. And, you know, therapists are experiencing vicarious trauma. They're working with clients with a lot of complex needs. But one of the number one things is if you are a therapist and you're female, that is actually the contributing factor in most of the research. And other things like if you work in a toxic environment or you have a workload that's not sustainable, when you control for gender, some of those things go away. And so being female, there is something happening, right? Something culturally is happening. The second article on the right here, this is looking at college students. And so this is a multi-year study looking at exhaustion, cynicism, inadequacy as predictors of burnout. And those things were there. The longer you're in school, the more likely those things are to happen. But if you take gender out of the equation, you notice that it's different. It is happening most by and large at a significantly more extreme rate if you are a female student. We see this happen in medicine. So here's an example where surveying male physicians, 82% report their spouse handles all or most of their household duties, whereas when you survey female physicians, 5% of their spouses are handling all or most of the household duties. And then you add that to pay inequities. So physicians who are doing the same job, women are getting paid less. And the research is bearing out with every child that the woman has still doing the same job, that pay gap increases. All of these things contribute to burnout. So we have the gender pay gap. It's a global issue. So we're looking at kind of globally 68%. Women are making 68% of what men are making. The graph on the left shows the rankings from 2024 of the countries, the top 10 countries who are most actively working on this and trying to bridge this gap. The US is not on that graph, but just for your reference. And we're predicting that we're roughly 134 years away from gender pay parity. And in North America specifically, we're only about 95 to 100 years away. Are you experiencing any rage yet? Okay, so I just want us to like think a little bit about these things. This obviously has been somewhat of a non-binary approach, but all of these things that are weighing on the backs of women, it's magnified and worse if you are part of the LGBTQ plus community, if you are an immigrant, indigenous, a person of color. It just gets worse. Your rates get worse, your outcomes get worse. And this is why I think also that like when you think about objective 3, when we get there, like the areas that you are able to make an impact in your personal life and your professional life is important, because our ability to show up in a space and feel like we belong and that we're accepted and that there's inclusion, that's protective against burnout, and that's beneficial to us all, and that work is important. But if you are part of a community where there is already medical mistrust, there is already toxic relationships or judgment that is happening around your identity, everything that we've just talked about gets magnified. All right, so we're going to talk one more study, and then we're going to go into strategies. So this study was done in Canada. They had over 2,000 participants, and they pulled from workers from over 63 different places of work. And we're really wanting to look at the interaction between gender, age, and burnout. So they had 1,065 men, 1,008 women. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through these graphs. The bottom left one, this is looking at professional efficacy. And so in all of these, men have the blue line, women have the red line. And at first glance, it looks like the longer you live, the longer you work, things are improving for women. But this is reverse coded, okay? So it is not true. What this is showing is that over time, your professional efficacy is actually getting worse for women, and it's getting better for men. And we know that this is a domain that's also tied to burnout. And what this kind of concluded is that over time, men's jobs are getting better. They're getting better pay. They're getting more sustainable workloads. They're getting more satisfaction out of what they're doing. And women's workloads their work conditions are not getting better. And so this is like another domain that's kind of demonstrated in the literature. The other 3 graphs, they're looking at emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and then total burnout. And you can see there's this bimodal trend that's happening for women in all of them. And so the ages are there at the bottom. Roughly between the ages of 25 and 35, that's when women are most at risk for burnout. So many are building their families, building their careers, building their homes, and you have a lot of demands on you from a whole bunch of different environments. And then we notice there's a little bit of a dip. Interestingly, where that dip starts, that is the rate in which the majority of women ask for a divorce. And so, data from last year shows that 70% of divorces were led by women and were cited by inequitable distribution of emotional energy, effort in the home, effort in the relationship. And we notice that there's more of a drop in burnout. Now, most people also, if you were raising a family at that time, you may not have littles at home anymore. There are other things that are taking some things off your plate. And then we get to go into phase 2 of burnout at age 65 and later, right? And so this is when women then start they might be caretakers for older people in their family, and then they start taking care of their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And especially in Appalachia, where we have a lot of skipped generation families, you might be the full-time caregiver of your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren. And research really shows it is the grandmothers by and large, not the grandfathers doing this work. So we just kind of get to continue having a second wave of this. The other thing that's interesting that they didn't really bear out as much in this article is that at the lowest point of burnout, this is when most women are going through menopause. And there are a lot of frustrating things that happen in menopause, but as a cancer patient who went into surgical menopause at 35, there is something about not having estrogen that really gives you the level of apathy where you can just get really clear on what you will and won't take anymore. And that can be helpful with burnout prevention as well. And so I just kind of want to note that. If you're familiar with TikTok and YouTube scholar Melanie Sanders, she's really making waves with kind of educating people on this apathy that can come with menopause. So she's got millions of followers at this point, and she has started the We Do Not Care Club. And I think that this is really helpful for us to think about, how do we have our own versions of We Do Not Care Club if you have not, yet went through menopause. But, not caring if your bra, underwear, or your socks match. We don't care. And as someone who this semester led a whole in-person training with my shoes mismatching, I can tell you, we do not care. Not caring if you're hungry. We did not lock the kitchen. Not caring if your spouse or partner had a long day. So did we. Our day included brain fog, night sweats, insomnia, frozen shoulder, and rage, right? So We Do Not Care Club. And this is really also part to bring awareness of this identity shift is wild for women, because we have been programmed to fulfill the needs of everyone around us. And really kind of right as we get to the cusp where we do not care, we go into our second act of caregiving. So as we transition into thinking about strategies, I want you to keep some of these, things related to culture, society, gender roles, social roles in mind for yourself, how you show up in the world as a person and how you show up in the world as a professional. I want to recenter us again on privilege. So I'm gonna give you 5 quick strategies. If when you hear these strategies, you think to yourself, these are so simple, they are just so simple. This has been a complete waste of time. I cannot believe that I came to hear this. You probably have a privilege that you're not experiencing burnout, and that is wonderful for you. I love that journey for you. But we need your energy to help us in these other areas, okay? That's what your role is going to be right now. If you hear these strategies and they sound impossible, there is no possible way you could do these, and I have been there. I have definitely been there. That is a sign you are in some form of your burnout era. If these just feel like there is no way that it could happen. If you hear these and you start making judgments of people, that they're lazy for doing this, that it's a cop-out, that's ridiculous, you too are probably in your burnout era, but you are also in denial about that. So all of these are little flags to kind of be taking note of. And then as we go through these, it's not going to be realistic that any of us can do this 100% of the time, all the time. But I want you to think about an 80% rule. These are the rules, not the exception. And that there is also a layer of privilege that comes with, this is coming from a standpoint of someone in academia where there's a level of flexibility with what my job can look like, and that this would need to be translated in different kinds of ways depending on where any particular individual or employee, might be at any given time. Okay, so number 1, explore your personal patterns. These are going to look different for different people. For me, one of the things, especially in this job, I think in a previous job, I definitely would it's that chronic stress. There's already things happening at work that were without my, out of my control. But with this job, it's this dang honeymoon phase that gets me every time. I genuinely love what I do, but that is a risk factor for me. I get so jazzed up on something at work that then before I know it, I'm down into all kinds of other things, right? I'm involved in so many other projects, and it's invigorating and I love it. But I get in this honeymoon phase and I cannot see the chronic stress coming. And I live my life one unanticipated event away from total burnout despair. And that is not sustainable, right? So being able to really think about, how do these stages happen for you, and use the strategies for intervention and recovery. But eventually, you really want to use the strategies for prevention. That's going to be your strongest way. Just prevent going in that phase at all, if you can. And then the other little thing that I know about myself is so I have this warrior person up here. I will battle it out all the way through the stages of burnout. And then I like feel really strong. And I'm like, I could do that again, right? And like, that is also not helpful. Like, that's not helpful. And so trying to reframe for myself, I need to be strong and, you know, approach the challenge of burnout prevention and not like, I'll just slay another dragon another day. And that it's just, that doesn't serve me. But for you, this could look very different. You know, it may be that it's really hard for you to say no. It may be that you don't know what your true calling or identity is about. It may be that you're a people pleaser. And so figuring out what is keeping you locked in some of these things for the pieces that are self-imposed, right? Because we can have these systemic influences and self-imposed things that we're doing that keep us in the cycle. Number 2 is know the differences between self-soothing and self-care. We live in a world where there's a lot of lip service around self-care, but I think really understanding the distinction between these can be super helpful. They're both fine, but for burnout, we really want to use it in a specific way. So self-soothing is like, it's a short game and you have temporary relief. And we all need to do some amount of self-soothing. That's not a problem. But self-care is going to be more of the long game. It's not necessarily permanent. You have to continue engaging in it. But it's going to give you more than temporary relief. And you are going to finish that thing with increased capacity. So it's not just a time out from the stress from you. You're going to return back with increased capacity. You're going to feel renewed, recharged, revitalized, refocused in some kind of way. And this is going to look different for each of us. You've got to figure out what is functioning for you. I have a tip here at the bottom. One thing to consider just to get you started is like opposites attract. So if you have a job where you are sitting still a lot, your self-care may need to be high intensity. If you have a job that's very loud, you may need to have some self-care things that are very quiet. And that can give you a starting point of like, how do you replenish one of those buckets that's kind of been emptied throughout the day. Some examples for me, self-soothing, I love some trash reality TV. And that's okay. Like, I'm going to engage in that. Okay. Like, I love that. But do I feel like restored and refocused to go back to my work afterwards? No. But is that something like if I notice I need a little bit of a break or I'm going to do this to have some temporary relief? Yes, that's going to be a thing that I'm going to do. Self-care for me is playing basketball twice a week during my work day. Notice if your judgment flag is going up, what that might say about you, okay? This does not make me a lazy employee. It makes me a better employee. It makes me more productive on those days and the days after. And this is something I've learned about myself. It's also something, again, from our different levels of privilege. As a cancer patient, I never thought I would be able to engage with that again in my life. And I'm not letting it go. And so what are the things that do help increase your capacity? For me, it might be taking time off and away from work, completely away from work. Sometimes in the middle of the week for like no reason. I'm just realizing that's what I need. And that makes me better the next day. But you have to be able to like explore those things and not care what other people are thinking about you, and even more recognize other people are not thinking about you as much as they're thinking about themselves. So you're probably okay. Number 3, use brain chemistry to your advantage. So I've got you a little bit of a cheat sheet here of some things you could think about for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. We have got to counterbalance the cortisol that is pumping through our bodies, okay? So here are some things to do. You can also think about behavioral activation. So these are things like, how do you get sunlight on your skin, your hands in the dirt, your feet in the grass, your body in the wind? What can you do that puts you in a different environment and can activate some of these things in your brain that you're not getting activated in front of your computer screen? And even better if you can bundle these things together. So can you go for a walk and be in the sunlight and talk to a friend and have a work meeting at the same time? Go you. That's awesome. Do that if you can do it. But be aware that you're not overworking or considering this as multitasking. I can check my email at red lights because I'm bundling, right? Like that is not bundling. And so think about, did this activity allow you to increase these things in your brain, or did it increase cortisol? Because you don't need any more cortisol bundles. Number 4, this is the most important one, but like kind of doing the other ones are going to lead to this, but this is the most important one. Schedule like your life depends on it. Because like it really does. Like your life actually does depend on it. And so there's 3 strategies within this one that I think are the most helpful. Strategy 1 is putting those self-care things in first. So we're at a time of the year where we're all starting to like build out what our spring schedules are going to look like. My first thing that I put in my work schedule is every Wednesday and Friday from 11 to 1 o'clock, I'm playing basketball and I'm not available. And that goes in my schedule very first thing. Do I make it 100%? No. But do I make it 80%? Yes. And can I try for 90 or 95? Absolutely. But that's going in there first. For me, the next thing that's going in there is nutrition, because I will get so jazzed up on something at work, I will not eat. I will just go weeks and months that I've realized I've never had a meal while at work this whole semester. When did I eat? And you know, it's okay as a human to like fill yourself with food in the day. Like you're allowed to do that. So I need to put that personally in my schedule, and that's self-care. When I am nourished, my capacity is increased. I actually think better and I work better because I did eat. If you can go and eat with a friend and bundle that with a social activity, even better. Now you've done 2 things, right? I'm putting in the other things in my calendar first that are important. What does that look like for you? You know, is that school drop-off? Is that school pickup? Is that theater? Is it chorus? Is it your kid's basketball game? Is it something that your partner is into? But they go in first. This also gives you a more realistic picture of like, what is the time left over for work and how do you need to put that in there? And so this takes us to the middle graphic. And this is really trying to use time blocking to your advantage. If you can be intentional with blocking your time and you can go into work, not burn out, but with increased capacity, you can actually get just as much done in more effective bursts of time. So the column on the left of that is kind of showing what a person's schedule might be when you're just checking your email all throughout the day, you're accessible all throughout the day is kind of running you. And the one on the right is like where you're being intentional with exactly what you're doing in these chunks of time, and you're staying focused on only those things. Again, can we do it 100% of the time? No, but we want to shoot that this is the rule. The thing I find in academics is the most challenging with this is we will sometimes do this time blocking, but we time block like only for our in-person events. It's like, these are all the meetings I had this week. This is when my body needs to be in this place. I need to teach this class. I have to go talk to this person. And we save all of the invisible parts of our job for our second full-time job we do on nights and weekends. And this is when you think about work and your scholarly activity and your reading and your grading and your writing. And you can do that work without having another human in the room per se, but we tend to max out our schedule or look at like, oh yeah, I'm available Friday afternoon because there's nothing in there. But it's because you did not book in there. You also needed time to think, and you also needed time to read, and you also needed time to write. And we end up working a full-time in-person job during the day, and then an imaginary but real full-time night and evening job, and you're not getting paid for both jobs. Like you're only getting paid for the one. And so it's really important to time block that in there. And I think it also allows for a data-driven approach for administrators, like sometimes you can better see with that what is not sustainable and what pain points are. And I think if you can bring that, like we've been successful with several things of bringing to our chair, of like when we really put this out, what we're actually doing, there are things we're going to have to cut out because like it just can't be done in these amount of times. But if you don't put it in there, you're going to do it anyway, but you're letting it steal from your life and not from your work schedule. The third part is this little eraser guy, and I really love this because I suppose he's like, deuces, we're going to erase some of this. But I really recommend every single Sunday night, you then look at that schedule, you check in with your body, and if you need to cancel some things, you cancel it. And life goes on. And this is hard, and this can be hard to do, but I can tell you, you are replaceable. You are replaceable at work, and you will be replaced immediately. When I was diagnosed in 2019, it was kind of like an emergency situation. So people at work didn't know I was going to be like going in for surgery. And when I came out of surgery, my first thought, I was just like, oh my gosh, what emails have I missed? They don't know where I am. They don't know why I'm not responding. I need to let them know like as soon as possible. And I was working for our current department and also for another department at the time. And I emailed them and basically all I said was like, you know, I'm really sorry. I haven't been on email. I mean, like I couldn't even be unconscious for surgery, y'all. Like, and you know, like, I'm so sorry. I've not responded to your emails. I wanted to let you know. I've just been diagnosed with cancer. I don't know the plan yet, but like as soon as I know something, I'll let you know. Before I got discharged from the hospital, my job was given away. I didn't even get home from the hospital and my job was given away. And the way I found out is a male colleague called me asking if I didn't mind to go ahead and send him all the materials I'd already prepped. Sometimes you're replaceable before you even die, okay? So like, you've got to really think about, this doesn't make you a lazy employee. It can make you a healthier employee. It can make you a better employee. But you've got to figure out how you build your schedule to prevent burnout. Check it on Sunday. And if you need to delete some things, delete it, because life is going to go on at work and it is going to go on with or without you, and people are going to be fine. Probably 90% of the time what you canceled, they're going to be glad you canceled it, right? So like, get the eraser out. And then the last one here, stay fierce with your yeses and your nos, but it's really hard to do that if you're not being honest with your schedule. If you're pretending like that there's not this invisible work that you do, you can't be honest with your yes and nos. And once you're able to get to this point, I encourage you to really think about your life in terms of seasons, semesters, or even years, like really only having one to three things that you can like be about, and everything else may need to be no's. So like right now, preparing for the spring, for example, we're rolling out a new EHR at the clinic. Is that going to be the most invigorating career experience of my life? Probably not. But I know I'm going to have to say no to some cool things that I get offered, because that I have time that I'm going to have to commit to that project. And if I do that project and keep saying yes to other things, I'm saying no to my life. And so I know for the spring, one of my top priorities is time is going into that thing. Not everything is for me. Not everything is for me right now. And that's okay. If I've done step 4 and I've put the important things into my schedule, then I don't have to be afraid of step 5. And so that's important to keep in mind. All right, we're on our last objective here, and this one's really quick. There's only a couple of slides, but I want you to think about the information from your first 2 objectives, and then, you know, are there areas that you can make a difference where you live, work, and play? So are there policy changes you could put into effect? Are there things that you could teach a future generation of students or children or trainees? And so there's different points of entry here of burnout factors, and I've got some examples of just ways that I've tried to do this in the clinic since like 2021. And we've written some, you know, about this. So like What does it look like to set accessibility expectations? What does it look like to have calendar autonomy, schedule flexibility? I've really tried to help students like explore having ownership and agency and control over that. You know the outcomes that you still need to get to be in this training program, but if you work best at a certain time of day or a certain time of the week, that's nothing to me. We need to pick, like, when is your capacity restored? And that's an important skill, and it's important for your sustainability in the future and as someone to be in mental health in the future, because burning you out is helpful to no one. But if we don't teach you now while you're in training, you may not learn until you get cancer. You may not learn until you lose your job. You may not learn until there is a major life event that forces you to really face that. We put in a behavioral activation friendly dress code. So we have a lot of messaging in our clinic, in the waiting room, in our new patient paperwork, to kind of explain this to folks that they know we're not just being lazy and slouchy. There's a reason that we're doing this, right? But we want to practice what we preach. And if being able to dress and feel physically comfortable, being able to get outside, being able to move your body, being able to bundle while you're at work, then if that helps prevent burnout, like, we're going to do that. Being professional is an attitude, it's a behavior, it's a value, it's not what you wear. And so are you in a position of power somewhere where you can think about how can you leverage some of these things to make life just a little bit better in some domain? Because it's the accumulation of those things that really matter. Just like with stress, it's the accumulation of all these little stresses. We can combat that with small things that each of us can contribute in whatever position that we're in. So I want to leave you just kind of with a self-reflection, and you're welcome to like take a picture of this slide, or we can probably get the slides out to you as well. But I want you to continue to think about these things and really like check in with yourself. What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? Maybe are there ways you need to support an important person in your life in being able to do these things? What are the current like pain points that you're experiencing? You might need professional, help depending on where you're at in your current stage of burnout. You might benefit from therapy. You might benefit from coaching. You might need, to go to a self-help resource or have an accountability person. How are you uniquely positioned to impact burnout culture and overwork culture in some kind of way? And then what are any specific things that you want to hold on to from today? Because as soon as we leave this room, all those systems just go back full force, right? And it's as if we never had this conversation. So what do you want to hold on to? Okay. So that is the end. I have 3 more slides, but they're all references. So if you want the references, I'm happy to send those out. But I'm shocked we have time for questions. So it's amazing. Any questions?
I'm going to draw attention to the slide where you had the article, the director deletes the email app off the phone and everything. How did that go? Is that was like a...
Oh, that was a real life thing. That was me. Yeah. So I did delete email off my phone. It went very well for me because I just eliminated that whole thing, and it was like, if I don't have time, it really helped with my time blocking of like, if I don't have time to be intentional and sit down at a computer to think through what you've just emailed me and give you a thoughtful response, honestly, it just gave me more rage throughout the day. If I could see what was coming up, and then I could just like turn on it, but I just couldn't do anything with it. But then I couldn't be mindfully present with what I was at. It was about, where can I have the best capacity? And so I deleted that off my phone. And then I had a major backslide in that in like 2024 and 25. And shout out to Allie for holding me accountable. At one point, she was like, so I didn't think you had email on your phone. And so it has been deleted again. But yeah, I'm just thinking about accessibility. And I can't, I think one of the things with boundaries is like the difference between you can communicate boundaries, but like only I can be the one that can really execute the boundary. And so even if I say to you, please don't email me, really the onus is on me of like, don't go log into your email. And so I think it's like just creating those boundaries to where it doesn't matter what behaviors you engage in. If you're going to email, if you're going to whatever, I know when I am going to engage in what I can. Um, and I think that's been helpful. And I've kind of followed that same thing with social media. Other questions?
Oh, so how do you think you deal with like speaking for a friend? Like the thought comes up of like, am I just being weak? If you feel like burnt out or like, especially maybe you actually have a slow week, but you still feel like just exhausted. So how do you think you like can reassure yourself that you're not just being weak, or like how do you have some objective way to figure out like, am I being weak or am I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there could be different strategies. One, I think, is like that could be reframed from like I'm being weak to like I'm listening to my body. I'm noticing this about my body, and that's actually being strong, right? Like that's being insightful. That's being smart. That's being preventative. I think also thinking about these systems that like we carry so much around with us. It can also be that when you have a lighter day or a lighter week, now you have the moment to feel the weight of the other things, and that your overwork or your busyness is like not allowing you to check in that kind of way. But probably in truth, that you're being weak is the least likely explanation of what's happening. It's just picking which of those like resonates and makes the most sense.
Was it a difficult decision to be so honest at multiple turns?
I think as a personality trait for me, no, just because it is kind of like you just get what you get. And I'll have this talk with you at the laundromat or like, I mean, it's just, but I think for some people, obviously, it could be challenging, but um, I just sort of wear it all out there. So, yeah. I think the challenging part is like, especially more during cancer treatment and cancer recovery, and then even times when I'm more activated in my own burnout, there can be the resentfulness comes up, where then it's just like, I mean, how nice it would be that my biggest worry right now would be what you're talking about, but it's not. You know what I mean? And I think that's when I can really tell I'm not in a good, that's a cue to myself, like I'm not in a good place. Yeah.
Do you think self-care sometimes
It can be, as long as you're noticing it increases your capacity and that there is a renewal kind of thing with it. But do you have like a specific?
I guess it's like you're stuck in that case burnout and almost like triggers a depression. And it's like, I know going outside to benefit me and taking a while probably benefit me, but like nothing.
Yeah, yeah. It can sometimes just be things you may not have the desire to do it, because that is definitely how burnout works. So it's like finding, like, start somewhere, start anywhere, any nugget of any of the strategies, just some movement in a direction. And then I think like that's where I also think having an accountability partner can be really helpful, because sometimes having someone on the outside that can just kind of help pull you along